Why are the Pacers playing so wobbly right now, and can they fix it? That is the question that Eddie Garrison and I will attempt to tackle today, talking defense, offense, the bench, everything on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, the Pacers don't play. No games on back-to-back days, so we can zoom out a little bit and look at the way this team is playing and what it means going forward. Currently 9-7, but very wobbly their last 8 games. Up and down, win-loss, win-loss, win-loss. Why is that the case? Why can't this team find some consistency? What is preventing them from being a little bit better? And can they actually do those things that they need to do to get there? Well, Eddie Garrison from the Pacers Radio Network and 107.5 The Fan is going to join us to tackle that. We talk some defense. We talk some offense and some turnovers. We talk about the new look bench group not playing so well and tons more, including stuff that is going well because the Pacers are still, in fact, over 500 and not a terrible team, despite some crummy play recently. We get into all that and more with Eddie Garrison today. Let's just hop right in. He's back. You've heard him here many times. He's producing those radio broadcasts you hear all the time. It's Eddie Garrison from the Pacers Radio Network and 107.5 The Fan. And we got to talk about a team that cannot win 2 in a row or lose 2 in a row right now. The Indiana Pacers, who just wobbly lost to the Blazers to go 2-3 in an important 5-game stretch. Eddie, I was on a show you usually produce today with Jake Query and Jimmy Cook, and Jake Query asked me the perfect question that I will now spin back to you. Right now, Pacers 9-7. They have some good wins. They have some stinky losses. Are you glass half full with this team or glass half empty going forward?
I will say glass half empty, because when you listen to Rick Carlisle talk before the start of the season, whether that was on with Corey, or not Corey, but the Wake Up Call with Kevin and Andy Sweeney on The Fan, or media availability leading up to the season and throughout the course of the regular season thus far, is that he talked about how important the start of the season was because of how much lighter their schedule was in terms of competition to start the year compared to the second half, where it gets extremely tough. So to me, if the Pacers are hanging around that 500 mark now, what's it look like post All-Star break when they're facing like Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, and all these other top teams in the East and Western Conference? What's it going to look like then? And if they're 500 now, I can only imagine how they're going to look later in the season. You can also make the argument that they're still somewhat adjusting to this new defensive scheme and strategy they roll out every single night. And hopefully by that time, then they've got this all figured out and they're clicking on that side of the court, for lack of a better phrasing.
Yeah. So when I did my preseason predictions for the record, I had them at 9 wins right now, and I had them finishing with 40. So they're at what I thought they would be. It's the way they've done it is the reason that question of half full or half empty even exists, because I predicted a win over Charlotte and Chicago and Portland, and they lost all 3 of those. But then they win in Philly. They beat Giannis for the second time in a half decade, basically, right? So it's like hard to get a feel for who they really are, especially because, as Justin Dopierak wrote asked a lot about last night, it's win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. Like this whole month, outside of beating Utah, San Antonio back-to-back, they cannot string together wins or losses, to their credit, a little bit. So when Jake asked me the question, I also tipped towards half empty just because of a tonal change we got last night in the presser, right? You can lose a couple close games at home during the season, like it's the NBA. Shooting comes and goes. Last year, I cited this on this show yesterday and with Jake and Jimmy, they won in LA, a game they had no business winning, right? They won in Golden State when Nembhard went completely bananas, right? Those it happens. The upsets on the road happen. So 1 or 2 times, yeah, okay. 4 times in your first 16 games, in games you feel like you should win. So if it was just, let's just pick 2, right? Just Charlotte, Portland, right? 1, they would have 11 wins, but 2 that kind of go, okay, we gave away a few, but we feel good about the wins we've stacked up. When it's 4, that's when frustration really kicks in, and it doesn't become about the fact that it happened. It's like, what are we doing wrong? Why can't we win these games that we should be winning? And I think you could sense a little tonal shift from some of the players last night that like, hey, this is kind of concerning that we're not getting up for all these games and winning games that we should win. And some of that is just twice, I think you could say. Orlando for sure, although Orlando's good. And then last night where there was just like, they looked soulless. They didn't look like themselves in a way that was, I think, significant. Whereas like the Chicago game, they just played bad. That one I've kind of just been like, whatever. Like that happens sometimes. But those two soulless performances, it's like, why? How did that possibly happen to these guys? So their wins are really good. Like I think this team can be good. They could go into Miami and win one of these and then steer the ship back and everyone goes, what were we even talking about? Why are we thinking about this team like this? But I think they might have just had a wake-up call, which maybe that's a good thing for them. But the fact that this has happened 4 times now in 16 games is really interesting to me in a way that's making me think just like what, like you just said, what can this team be if they struggled at times in this early stretch?
Yeah, like and another part of it too, outside of that Chicago game, it's been the same problem. The other 3, it's not being able to get stops, and the other team is obviously getting stops, and it comes down to just being able to execute down in crunch time. And I texted you this last night. I was just not pleased with the way the last couple minutes were handled. You had Tyrese, who had 20 in the first half. He's scored 12 in the second half, and I think majority of that was in the fourth quarter because he only got 3 points in the third, and that was the very first possession of the third quarter to start the second half for the Pacers. But I just felt like the offense needed to go through him, and it felt like times he was deflecting or pushing away to try to get Andrew Nembhard involved or to try to get Mathurin involved when he was on the floor. And then I think it was Bruce Brown and Neesmith had a couple of shots in there too. But it's like you're paying Tyrese starting next year that big contract to be your franchise player. Your franchise player has to make plays down at the end of the game. He's done that so far, and he's been terrific throughout the course of the season. I thought last night was like the first time where I felt like he tried to defer instead of take over.
He had 9 assists, and I'm like, what was he thinking? Yeah, so the McConnell stretch late in the third, I was a little more okay with it because he was just out there as like a threat, and they needed McConnell's energy so bad. And that got them back in the lead. I actually thought they might go back to it in the fourth. And I don't want to spend too much time just on the Portland game because they lost to Toronto in a similar fashion. And Orlando, they got their butts kicked. But, yeah, that was weird. And I've made the case a few times that I know he will never think this way, and it's a good thing because the way Tyrese Haliburton is wired is important to him being good. But there's just like 5 games a season where it's just like, just be selfish. Just shoot. And I get why he doesn't, and that's part of what makes him so great. But it also last night, at times, got in their way. And most of their losses that have been these 1-point losses, in fact, the Toronto one assuredly and the Charlotte one before Bridges was back, their defense was woeful. But the Chicago one and last night, 2 nights ago for you guys listening, their offense stalling is weird, right? They've only been under 124 times, which is, first of all, just insane to say out loud. That 12 of their 16 games have scored 120 points. Had they hit 120 against Chicago or Portland, they win both of them, right? 112 was Chicago's number, 114 was Portland's. In both of those games, they shot it poorly. Turnovers were killer against the Blazers. So that's kind of where I feel like the soulless part I said comes in, is just when some of it is based on their defense, right? They try to run. And when they're pulling the ball out of the net a lot because they can't string together stops, they can't run. But they never had, you were there. Like they had a couple chances to go up 5, 6, 7 against Portland. They had open threes. They just missed them. They never got the momentum, sucked the crowd back into the game shot. They turned it over at untimely moments. Like it's rare that their offense teeters like that, and that makes you go, they need that every night if they're going to defend at the level they do, right? Bottom 5 defense. So one answer is just defend better. Duh, right? We can talk about that for the whole rest of the show, but they can't have nights like that offensively, and it's going to happen. You're going to miss shots. I'm not going to kill them for missing shots, but the 20 turnovers has to be better too. So their close losses have not really had a theme to me, which is another tough part of this, is because it's not like, oh, just correct this and you're good. It's tough. They've got to be better in these, especially if they're all at home. They've got to be better in those games. Yeah,
I was just looking at it while you were talking there, and 3 of the 4 last losses that were kind of close, they've shot 75% exactly at the free throw line. Like it feels like to me in some of these close losses too, they haven't been good at the free throw line, which isn't typical when you consider how efficient they are scoring the basketball in the half court or when they're moving up and down the floor and shooting all the time. Like Buddy Hield missed some free throws to start the year, and it just feels like that's sometimes where it comes down to in the box score that we don't look at, I think, a lot or enough, is the free throw line.
Agreed. So for the numbers, the Bulls game where they scored 105, 12 for 46 from deep, 17 turnovers. The Charlotte game, they shot very well from three, but had 14 turnovers. They just didn't defend well in that one. Toronto game, they shot very well from three, and only had 6 turnovers, but they didn't defend in that one. And then last night was the offensive one, 8 for 33 from deep with 20 turnovers. And for reference, they are 1-4 in their 5 highest turnover games this season. So taking care of the ball, and of course they get a lot of open threes, actually making them. Like as a consequence of being a high volume shooting team, they're going to have some games like this. It's just been really unfortunate for them that against 2 crummy opponents they should have beat, they've happened. We know they can play better, but they haven't. Hey guys, short little break so I could talk to you about the lovely people over at eBay Motors, our partner who has teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft, scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And how about a guy who a lot of people know locally and who had a nice game against the Pacers this week, Jaden Ivey. His level of play has improved for the Pistons since joining their starting lineup, and that team is going nowhere. Surely they'll continue to invest in the young player like Ivy. Purdue standout, played very well against the Pacers this week. Other names on Josh's list, Scoot Henderson, who just had a nice game against the Pacers, Sadiq Bey, Gordon Hayward, and Al Horford. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, while eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, and that is the same with your vehicle. Think about your dream ride as a kid or a memory you have with a car you loved. I'll never forget my first car, going to the scrapyard to fix the hood after I had to. And you got to keep it running. You got to upgrade when you want to. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly at eBay Motors. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time or your money back. Plus, at those prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. There's another thing that I think has been really interesting in their recent games, in this recent 5-game stretch, because I actually think the individuals involved have done pretty well. In Atlanta, they changed it up. The starters switched. Obi to the bench, Nesmith to the bench. In came Buddy. What did I just say? I said the same players. Obi to the bench, Nesmith to the starters, Matherin to the bench, Hield to the starters. And Hield's been awesome as a scorer, at least, since doing that. Nesmith got hurt, sounds a little tougher. Obi has made, like, it feels like every shot he's taken since then. And Matherin had a good game in Atlanta and defended really well against Detroit, but has been teetering. So it helped more players than it didn't. But I feel like their bench, which was so crucial for them early in the season, their bench was defending really well. Felt like they were making a lot of shots. That was helping them win the non-Tyrese Halliburton minutes. It feels like their bench has been less impactful in these recent games. And I'm mostly thinking about the lineups where it is heavier, like 3 or 4 of them. And that has been something that's really kind of, it feels weird to call this a slump, right? It's not like they're like lost 3 in a row or lost 5 of 6 or something. But in this stretch where it feels like they're not playing as well as they can, I think their bench not playing as well has been really interesting.
Yeah. And I wonder if part of it is it starts defensively. Like if these guys are trying to put so much effort on the defensive end that it's kind of like, messing up their mind offensively. Because I think the switches of moving Nesmith and Buddy into the starting lineup hurt the offense in terms of the bench, because Obi's not a creator. Obi needs somebody to create for him. So that's why he plays better, in my opinion, with Tyrese in comparison to Andrew Nembhard. Whereas you can pair Nembhard and Matherin together. I think those two can complement each other well, because Matherin can bring the ball up the floor. He can handle the basketball. He's been a little bit better at that this year. He gets to the rim, and he doesn't need someone to facilitate the offense to him. Whereas you need that with Obi. And if Nembhard's not really doing that, or McConnell's not really doing that, then it's going to be hard for Obi to get involved with that second unit, which brings down the offense, because I don't think you're expecting a lot offensively from Jalen Smith or Isaiah Jackson, whomever is getting the minutes that night, because of possibly Turner being out or in foul trouble. So then you rely so heavily on Nembhard and Matherin to be your 2 leading scorers off the bench. And if you're relying more on Nembhard to be an offensive player, I don't know how well that's going to look, because I think he's such a great floor general and a game manager rather than just being a score first point guard.
Yeah, the thing that man, talking is really hard on a podcast where the only thing I have to do is talk. The thing that stood out to me in Atlanta, the first game they switched it up was they adjusted to this. The first thing I thought about when I saw the group of the bench was going to be Smith, Toppin, Mather, and Emhart is that's not a lot of shooting, right? Maybe they can create just enough with that group, but they're not going to shoot very well. And in the first half, they had McConnell with that group at times. They had Bruce Brown with that group at times. And I think there's merit to Bruce Brown being the fifth guy with that group, which I'll talk about in a second. But in the second half, it was Buddy at times. They needed the shooting, and they got it, and that helped that group stabilize. Now, also, like I said, that's like just enough creation, I would say, on most nights. Maybe not. And so Bruce Brown is usually the fifth guy you need in that Atlanta game. Maybe I'll throw that out forever. Maybe I will just never reference the numbers of that game as like a real basketball game that happened.
Yeah.
What was that?
That was a 2K game. What are you talking about?
But I'm with you that sometimes even before they change the starters, they would close the first and third quarter with Tyrese and 4 bench guys or something. So they acknowledging you need another creator with that group is maybe something they could do. And then you dig into the numbers. They used to be, no matter how many non-starters are on the floor, the Pacers had one of the best net ratings in the league, right? So with 4 starters on the floor, Pacers have the 6th best net rating right now. With 3 starters on the floor, the Pacers have the 3rd best net rating. But this is where it's nosedived, is the groups I just said, where it's heavy bench. With 2 starters on the floor, worst net rating in the league, minus 21.4. That's 13.6% of their minutes. With just 1 starter on the floor, 18th in the league. So those minutes where there's a lot of bench guys were good early in the season have really fallen off. And I think that's kind of been a part of their teeteringness too, is their bench is no longer this big weapon it was early in the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with you, especially
a lot of numbers. Sorry, making you digest a lot on the fly.
Yeah, it's okay. I can handle numbers, I think, but I think the shooting aspect of it is what hits home the most, because Aaron Nesmith is an underrated shooter, and Buddy Hield obviously is Buddy Hield, and you trade that out for Obi, who's I think hovering around just over 30% when it comes to 3-point shots. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. You probably do. But like he's probably just over 30% and just under 35%. So he's making about 1 every 3. And if that's probably the case, then it's not really that much in terms of production and efficiency. And we all know how Mathurin is. He's a streaky 3-point shooter. There's times where he looks confident when he rises up and he knocks one down. There's other times where it's like, I'm just going to take this. And it doesn't go in. So I think that's the biggest aspect in terms of the bench right now. And I thought that stood out to me when you're talking there regarding the shooting.
Yeah, Nesmith at 44.6%, Hield at 41.7%, and Hield's number includes a 5-game stretch where I think he missed every 3. Not really, but it felt like he missed every 3 he took, right? So that's crazy that he's got it that high, although he's been on fire since rejoining. You were almost exactly right on top end. 30.6%, and he's made 0.9 out of 3.1 per game. Basically exactly what you outlined, right? So I think that's been an interesting part of this, is just that the change the dynamics of their second unit. And like they had Nembhard started last year, right? So there's not a ton of Nembhard Mathurin together to go off of, and Smith's this new player. And Rick Carlisle keeps saying this, and I think this is important. Everything's different about this team from last year. Like, it's a lot of the same players, but they're playing in a different way. Different guys have developed. Bruce Brown and Obi are in the rotation now. So it's like, it's hard to use last year as a launching point anymore. He views this team as like a whole new team, even though there's a lot of similar players. So even if they do have experience together, it's different. So I think getting their bench back on track will be, if they can, will be important, or figuring out the right ways to mix and match. And maybe that just means keeping different starters on the floor at different times. And I know that's a hard thing to do, and it's just guessing to say who the right ones are. But that's, I think, important, is when you look at those numbers. If they have lots of starters out there, they're doing pretty well. They have good bench guys who have utility as defenders, as shooters, like we've gone through. Figuring out the right lineups is important, right? That group that closed the Detroit game, that was awesome. Where did that come from, right? So, like, finding those combinations, I think, will be key for Carlisle going forward. Eddie, it's not all bad. It's not all bad. They are still 9-7. They did still beat Philly and Cleveland twice, and Milwaukee. And I will predict that by next week, I will add Miami into that list of teams they have beaten, mostly because it's hard to beat a team twice in one city. One more break here, guys. We got to talk about FanDuel, the NFL. About a little over halfway done, and things are rolling in the football world. The weather's getting colder, but the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers on FanDuel will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. How about that? 150 smackaroos. But all you got to do is that $5 moneyline bet and win it. If your team wins, boom, $150. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time than right now to dive in on the action with the NFL rolling. Like I said, the NBA is underway, about a month in-season tournament coming up for the finals, and the NHL, of course. The app on FanDuel, very easy to use. They have a wide range of betting options such as spreads, over-unders, player props, and more. Your favorites, they got them. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season on FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Not everything's going bad. Not everything is going bad. What do you feel like is going well for the Pacers, even in this recent stretch where people aren't as psyched about how they've played?
I would say the backup center. Like, that's where I would start first is like, yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is Tyrese, just how otherworldly he's been the last 2 weeks. And it's kind of wild that he hasn't won a player of the week yet with how crazy he's been playing. That's a different conversation for a different day. But like the backup center, like last night, Isaiah Jackson was good. He's been really solid and consistent lately, which is something that we haven't seen a lot of from him this season or in the past, is because usually when he gets on the floor, he's committing a lot of dumb fouls, or he's in foul trouble all the time, or whatever, or it's a blowout and he's on the floor. You just don't see the consistency. And then with Jalen Smith, where does the shooting come from? Like last year, he couldn't hit the ball in front of a bar, and he couldn't throw the ball in the ocean. And now every time he rises up, it's like, all right, it's going to hit the bottom of the net. Whether that's from deep or whether that's mid-range, or he's shown a lot too in the post, which has kind of been a little bit surprising to me. I know he talked about this offseason putting on some muscle, so it's glad to see that's actually paying off a little bit in terms of being inside. And I think his defense has been solid. I think he's been one of the more solid defenders the Pacers can rely on night in and night out. But to me, I think what's going well right now is the backup center position between those two.
That was a part of their bench being so good early, is no matter which one of them it was, perfect. They'll both be great.
Yeah.
Was Jalen Smith now 14 of 20 from deep? I think. I mean, I should know that. He's been on fire. He can't miss. And when they've needed Isaiah Jackson, whether that's to be a 4 or to be the 5 because of injuries or foul trouble, whatever, he has been really solid. His foul rate's actually up this year, which maybe isn't super exciting if you're the Pacers, but some of that's just because he's doing better at other stuff that he's good at, and he's had to foul to be in some of the positions he's in. Like Turner's foul rate's up too because he's cleaning up a bunch of messes. Isaiah Jackson's rebounding very well. He's making shots. He's running the floor. Like, he's just making less dumb mistakes, right? None of those illegal screens he had all the time last year. None of those, like, why did you jump at that shot fouls? Like, a lot of that stuff that was like low-hanging fruit for him to get better are gone. And I think a lot of also the reason the Pacers can win, and maybe can lose, but can win any game they play, because Tyrese Halliburton's on the team, right? Like, at his best, he's been a top 10 guy in the league this year. That hasn't been all the time, but either way, he's in that whatever range you want. I would probably say like 8 to 13 this season is the number range I would use. And I would accept people saying higher than that. And, when he can create his own shots efficiently every game and make life easy for his teammates at any moment, and is such an identity setter. And the thing that has stood out, and the thing that like Daniel Tice and TJ McConnell talked about other teams' players saying last year, it makes it really hard to scout the Pacers and like have a plan when their offense is so random and the ball's flying around and it's all like natural to them. The other team can't read it. And the reason they can do that is because Tyrese Halliburton is such a whiz with the ball and gets everybody moving and gets everything happening. So he is fantastic. Obviously, his numbers are unbelievable, but he also makes everyone else better. And I think that is so significant for this team. And so it's the lazy answer, but what's going well? Their star player is going very well so far.
Something I'm curious to ask you this now. Do you think in order to improve the defense, do you think Carlisle tries to dial it back a little bit in terms of the chaotic nature and run a little bit more half-court sets, just so that the opposing team can't just instantly inbound the ball and get up the floor, or come off a miss and then can't get back in transition?
Yeah, they've talked about how part of the reason it's challenging to defend is because of the way they play offense, right? And so that relationship exists. It's also tiring to play fast, right? Like for 48 minutes. So maybe they're playing okay in the half court. Like when they get slowed down this year, it's not like a death sentence like it was last year. Remember that Heat game? They play the Heat this week, so perfect time to bring this up. In Cambridge last December, what was the final score? Like 86-82 or something, right? Like the Pacers could not win that type of game last year. And I think they would have a chance in it this year. It wouldn't be the prettiest thing, but they would look better. They've had games where the slowed down game was not a death sentence for them. So if they get a little better in the half court stuff, and I'll remember at the draft lottery talking to Tyrese Halliburton about the playoffs, right? He wants to be there. Well, what are you seeing that you need to apply to this Pacers team to be good if you get there? He said, we got to be better in the half court, right? When the game slows down, that's what these games are like. We'll have to be better there. So they know it, right? They have had games where it's looked okay in those settings. I think in Philly was the standout one to me, but Milwaukee, their half-court offense was pretty solid. Cleveland, the home game, the in-season tournament game. But if they can make that a more consistent, then I think that would allow them to do what you just said of dialing it back a little bit. But also their defensive scheme is pretty aggressive, right? They try to defend pick and rolls with two guys and not use a third if they don't have to, which sounds conservative, but it's like it requires more rotation. It's two guys on the ball. They're trying to fight through screens as often as they can, right? Calling it aggressive is the wrong word. I think aggressive is a poorly used NBA word, and I just used it like 100 times. But their defensive scheme is not conservative, right? So that is also part of this is maybe changing it a little bit, but I don't know if they need to change their scheme. I think it's just hard to play the way they want to play defensively, given the way they play offensively.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I feel like they're running so fast offensively that it kind of puts their defense in a compromised position half the time to where they can't get back to get set and to get ready so the other team's just getting easy shots near the basket or in the lane because points in the paint's the real problem right now defensively is that even like last night on Monday night with Jeremy Grant in the fourth quarter, like they just gave him a ball on the left wing or the right wing at the elbow. He backed down whomever it was Neesmith or if it was Bruce Brown, fadeaway jump shot right there at the free throw line every time. And they just couldn't stop it.
They couldn't. They've always struggled with those big weight. Like last night was interesting because I don't think Portland's actual points in the paint number was super high, but their points like one step out of the paint number had to be insanely high because Brogdon and Grant were hitting a bunch of those and they were getting open or at least a look they liked like every time. In theory, if you're like a numbers idiot like me, you're going to be like, heck yeah, they forced him into tough 8-footers all night. But like Grant and Brogdon are okay with that. And they made a bunch of them for a reason. So it's just hard. And I think that as good as their offense is, figuring out that balance perfectly. And maybe it's just better defensive talent on the team at some point in the future. I'm not interested in talking about talent changes in November, but is the answer because I'm of the opinion now that any player can at least be capable on offense playing next to Tyrese Halliburton. But yeah, the defense has not been awesome, has been discussed ad nauseum, but it's a big part of their season, right? If they were 24th in defense right now, they're probably 12-4, 11-5. I don't know. That's not even right. That is right. There's 16 games. I thought I just messed that up.
Oh, by the way, 14-21 on Jalen Smith. I don't know if I said that.
Oh, I was off by one.
Yeah.
That's still crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you know how many per game shots it takes to be on the league leaders? Like, is he first in the NBA in 3-point percentage right now? It's
got to be like 2 or 3, right?
I was gonna say it's probably higher than what he's taking, which is not even 2 a game. But it's changed dramatically from last year when Jalen Smith took threes. I was like, oh, that's not what the Pacers wanted. To like, oh, hey, all right, they got an open 3 for Jalen Smith. Good for what a flip. So yeah, a lot going on with this team. I think it's weird that the fan they changed their expectations because they played so well. Having these good wins and having a good start made fans get to the point of like this Portland loss and Toronto last week. Like fans are disappointed at their current record, even though it's preseason about what people expected them to be at. And that's credit to them for playing that well. But it is interesting that, I'm doing it too, talking about the stuff they're doing poorly instead of like, hey, they're 9-7. That's kind of nice after an interesting stretch. So the point I put on the YouTube graphic says, can they get out of this funk? They're not in a funk, right? They're not playing. Like I said earlier, they're on a losing streak. They haven't lost 3 in a row. They haven't lost like 5 of 6 or something, but it does feel like they're playing worse than they could be at their best or should be. What do you think it'll take for them to be playing the way that at least people are thinking they can on a nightly basis right now?
I think it's just playing like on a string defensively. Like all of them just got to be in unison because it just feels like sometimes Matherin's out there ball watching and he loses track of his guy and he gets back. Someone cuts on the back door behind him, or there's times where they may ask for a double and he doesn't go double, or somebody else doesn't go double. It's just like the simple things. It seems to me like on ball pressure is fine, but as soon as they get inside the 3-point line, it becomes very, very soft, and it's much different. It's not as up in your face at all like it is when they're on the outside, and understand they're trying to run people off the 3-point line and trying to funnel players to Miles to alter shots or make life hell in the paint for guys to try and get a shot over him. But right now it's just not working out. But I think eventually they'll get it right. I think it's just a lot of adaptation to, like we've talked about already. You're trying to work in Bruce Brown to the offense a little bit too. You're trying to work with him defensively, and all these guys, you've changed the lineup now after, nearly a dozen games. So they're all still trying to gel and trying to figure out the system. So I think it's just a matter of time before they get out of this quote unquote funk.
Yeah, that's the wrong word, but it's on the graphics, so now I have to say it like 100 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, for the rest of the season, I think the answer to that question is going to be just defend better. Like, you are a lot more specific with it, which is good. And they're trying to give up to some extent. Like, what did Portland take last night? 23s. I have their game log in front of me. I should know this. Like, that's great. The Pacers are thrilled with that. 18. Detroit also took 18 threes. Right? Orlando took 20. They're actually doing a good job forcing the shots they want. It's just guys are making them because it's an open lane to the rim or the rotation's off or something. So they've got to be better on that end. And I think that's going to be a theme all year. And maybe it's talent, whatever. It doesn't matter. Maybe that's changed thing at some point, but getting better on D, I think, will help. And then the stuff I said earlier, I mean, this is the shooting is non-controllable to me. Like, they're NBA players, they'll just miss some nights, but they can't have these big turnover games, right? Like, they're so offensively gifted that they're scoring, 120 plus all but 4 times this season. If they reach 132, they have not lost this season. That's a high number. That's insane. If they had just held on against Toronto and not, had the worst last 3 minutes they've had all season, the magic number would be 126, where every time they hit 126 or more, they win. And they can do that. They've done that more than half of their games this year. So I think that just controlling the turnovers is another thing for me. If they shoot bad, they shoot bad, whatever. They did that against Portland. But if they turned it over, let's make up a number. 14 times instead of 20, that's 6 more shot attempts or 6 more possessions to score 4 points. They score, like, for the Pacers, they win that game to me. So, I mean, that's 14 still a lot of turnovers for them. They've been under 14 in over half of their games. So I think that'd be another thing for me is, keeping possession. The Chicago loss, they had a bunch of turnovers. The Orlando loss, they had a bunch of turnovers. The Toronto loss, they hit 14. The Portland one, they, of course, had their season high with 20. That's a big thing to me. And I think if they can cut that number down, if they, at 13 or under, I'm going to do math. They are 7-2 with 13 or fewer turnovers. They have such a good offense. Just keep the ball. Make sure they have the ball, and they'll do better.
Yeah, very NFL-esque. Don't turn the ball over.
I am ready to take Tom Allen's job. Take care of the ball, everybody. I am not ready to take Tom Allen's job.
But in terms of their defense, I want to go back to something. Like, he talked about Portland. They're not taking a lot. I forget the number that you said they took last night.
18. That's
18.
Crazy.
Which plays into how they want to play. I mean, they're second to last in terms of three-point percentage, so they're going to be okay with not taking threes. So I think there's some times where defensively, I wish they would lay off and let teams like Portland, Orlando, Detroit, Toronto, who are not good three-point shooting teams, take those threes, because there's a reason why they rank in the bottom, and there's a reason why I feel like you can lay back a little bit, let them take those shots, because more often than not, they're probably going to miss. And if that's the case, then it allows you to get out quickly in offense with Tyrese by just being able to push the ball up the floor.
So you ready? We might have just cracked the code. You're on it with this. 5 times this season, the Pacers have only, air quotes, allowed their opponent to shoot 20 or fewer threes in a game. They're 1-4 in those games. So it's actually not gone well for results doing that. Those 5 games where their opponent has taken 20 or fewer threes. Charlotte, a close home loss that we were talking about. Orlando, their worst game of the season. Portland, a close home loss that we're talking about. And Chicago, a close home loss that we're talking about. So maybe that's kind of what these teams want, is to attack the rim and not take threes. They beat Detroit only giving up 18 threes. And, hey, their offense was stellar that night. Now, also, the 2 times they've given up the most threes, the first game in Philly and the Boston game, they also got beat by double digits. So there is a sweet spot. Like, there is good evidence to, like, maybe containing the threes is the best thing. But I think you're right. Teams that don't want to shoot anyway, like somehow finding a way to coax them into taking threes could be a part of this, because that is really interesting to me that their 5 fewest ones happen to be 4 of their games that fans go, hey, that was awful. That was one of your worst losses.
And you look at Charlotte, Toronto, Orlando, and Portland, like all those teams right there are bottom 8 in 3-point shooting.
Look at us cracking codes here.
I just gave you something to write about or ask Rick Carlisle, so you're welcome.
Well, I actually, So I actually think that because they have Miles Turner, like their strategy of trying to prevent threes is smart, like given their personnel. But at its core, like we just said, you don't want teams to take threes. It's like taking the right threes. I think the Celtics were a team that tried to limit threes for a long time under Stevens and Udoka, and even I think a little bit Missoula. But they were trying to like prevent corner threes, and they were like okay with above the break threes, for example. I'd have to go back and read it. Someone wrote a really good article on it a couple years ago. And so maybe it's the type of threes, maybe it's the player, and like sometimes you might just lose because some random guy gets hot from deep, as IU basketball has seen all season. I'm just coping, but maybe that is more, but that's a lot harder. That requires a lot more game plan focus, which is hard in a regular season when you're playing a different team every night and all sorts of stuff that in the playoffs is maybe a little more plausible. So I think that you're onto something there. And so you're ready to see the Pacers next game where they let the Heat shoot exactly 25 threes and they only have 11 turnovers and Isaiah Jackson plays great and Tyrese Halliburton plays great. Maybe they win in Miami and then they're 10-7 and we look really stupid in 2 days, Eddie. Maybe that's all it is.
If they hold those figures that you just labeled out and they go undefeated the rest of the year.
That is definitely possible. We'll see. In Miami last year got right around Christmas, one of their most fun wins of the season. That was Tyrese Halliburton's FU game right after Wally's comments. So looking forward to seeing how they do in those 2 games before they come back home.
He had 43 in that game, right?
43. The weird, what is Kyle Lowry and Tyler Hero doing for 1 millisecond, right? They barely had a moment where they didn't communicate right, and he just drove the 3 right in their eyes. That was quite the moment. And that was what happened to the Pacers a lot against Portland. Is those small little double was just too late. They couldn't recover to the other guy. I don't need to keep rambling on the Portland game. Eddie, do you like the in-season tournament, by the way? Tonight is the end, so tomorrow we'll know who they play.
I will have a better answer for you when the tournament is over. I'm interested to see, does Boston try to go out tonight on Tuesday and run up the score to improve that point?
Please do.
I know there are teams that have done that, like Brooklyn, for example. They did that in their last in-season tournament game. One of their coaches on the sideline, I can't remember who it was yelling at the players to shoot the ball. And it was in the final seconds of the 4th quarter against, I think, Chicago or somebody. I can't remember who's in their group, but may have been Toronto. But they were like, shoot the ball and run up the score or whatever. And they're like in-season tournament game. So it's just very fascinating to see how these games are played. And then are these more beneficial for Orlando? Are these more beneficial for Indiana? Teams that are trying to get to the postseason compared to Boston, Cleveland, Miami, New York, because all these teams are in the playoffs regularly, so they could care less if they make it or not. It's just extra games that they don't have to worry about, the extra added stress games they don't have to worry about, and they can just go out and play basketball every single night.
Yep. By the time you're listening to this, you will know who the Pacers play and when in their first round game. I'm an in-season tournament fan, except for the courts, but only one more of those.
Have you seen a good court?
I like Toronto's. Theirs is the black one with the gray in the middle. That might be it.
Phoenix had a good one that looked like a natural. It was like a tan.
Yeah, Cleveland did natural as well. But Cleveland right now is having different court issues. I don't know if you saw Drew Smith hurting his ACL because their court's elevated and he landed weird coming off.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, so they don't get any benefit from me right now. but they're the tan one. Phoenix's I liked. I thought New York's was gonna stink, their orange one, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. I only hate the Reds. You can't see the ball, but whatever, not worth getting.
Yeah, the Washington court, the Philly court looked like it should have been in Washington because it was the Wizards colors, but they're in Philly, aren't they?
This is what people care about. But Tuesday night, which was last night for you listening, was the last group stage night. And then the quarterfinals, the last time you'll see the courts. I don't even actually know if they'll be there for the quarterfinals. Whatever. Doesn't matter. We'll see if they return next year. Eddie, thank you so much for the time talking about the wobbly as it stands Indiana Pacers. Where can people follow you and your not wobbly coverage of all of Indiana's sports teams and your help with all the radio broadcasts for said teams?
So as on the YouTube graphic, you can see it's at Eddie Garrison _. But those of you that listen podcast platform, I am on X/Twitter/Twix at Eddie Garrison _.
Twix, I like that.
Eddie, EDDIE, Garrison, GARRISON with the _. And Tony, I'm just glad I made it through this podcast with your owl staring at me in the background. I feel like he's been like just gazing into my soul the entire time.
There's a second owl. Oh, it's on the other side. I just swiveled the wrong way in my chair. But he's lower, so you can't see. Oh, the camera fell.
Oh,
That's
no.
brutal.
Nice forehead.
On there, below my shoulder, you can see the top of his head.
Oh, I can, yeah.
The NBA made these. For those who aren't on YouTube, the NBA made these owls on their website. They were selling one year for every team, and they were getting rid of them because no one was buying them. So I bought both of those for a combined $3 plus shipping.
Is that a Pacers one right there?
The one you see very easily is the Denver Nuggets. He's
That's
holding,
what I thought.
he's holding gold, and he's got a little axe in his other hand. And then the other one you see, funnily enough, I bought these like 4 years ago. It was last year's finals. That one's the Miami Heat. So he's got sunglasses on, and the basketball's on fire.
Nice.
So I've seen, I think, an Orlando Magic one floating around like eBay and Etsy. So I've thought about getting a third one because they're hilarious. But I've never seen any of the rest of the teams since that sale day. Riveting stuff for the listeners who can't actually see anything here. Tomorrow, Pacers play the Heat, and Caitlin Cooper is going to join us, and we're going to talk about all 16 players through 16 games. And by that, I mean 15 players have played, so Rick Carlisle will be our 16th player. Some early season analysis on everybody, but we're going to limit ourselves to 150 seconds per player. It's going to be a blast. And then they play the Heat twice. Looking forward to all that on Locked On Pacers to close out the week. Thank you all for tuning in today. We'll see you soon.